Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Saddleback webinar this week. I'm Liz Mangus, Literacy Specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. We have a great session for you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to be with us today. A few notes before we begin. The control bar is located on the bottom of your web browser window. That is where you will find the chat, the question and answer area, and the live transcript session icon. If you would like to take advantage of subtitles today, please click on live transcript and then select show subtitle. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A area. And when you chat with us today, please make sure that you select from the drop-down everyone or panelists and attendees, whichever one your chat menu says. Sometimes it will say panelists, sometimes it will say everyone. So you just want to make sure that you're chatting with everyone today. We'll get started right at 3 o'clock Eastern time. Please note that we are featuring an accessibility feature for you today. We do have source interpreting here. Anita is here. She's providing interpreting services. Should you need further accommodations, please message us in the chat. And welcome to everybody. We're so glad you are here. Saddleback and all three of our presenters today are on Twitter. So don't be shy. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter. Say hello. Let everybody know that you're joining us today. We love to hear from you on Twitter. We're really excited about this session to have three prominent speakers join us for this great conversation around our secondary multilingual learners. Let's see, it's almost time to start. We've got a few more minutes. Let's go to the chat and see who's here. Hi, Robert. Robert Kim is here. Welcome. Let us know what you teach and where you're joining us from. I see our numbers are starting to climb a little bit as people are logging in. Costa Mesa, California is here. Welcome, Tim. Thank you for joining us. All right, we have three great speakers joining us today. You know them, you've heard of them. That's why you're here. And they have a great book that they've co-written together that they're going to be telling us about. And we'll be giving one away as well. There will be a raffle at the end of the webinar. Welcome, Cassie. Welcome, Shannon. Hello, Sandy. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Morgan. I know we're counting down the days until Christmas break, winter break. Hope everybody is staying strong, working hard, and hopefully having fun with your students as well. Yeah, I know, I'm excited too. Welcome everybody. I see we have more people jumping on. We'll get started in just a minute or two. As you're joining, go ahead to the chat. Please make sure you select everyone from the drop down and then go to the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. Hello, Helen from Davenport, welcome. All right, it is just about time to get started. Oh, we have England in the house. Thank you, Joanna, for joining us. Hello, Massachusetts. Okay, I have to stop. I have to focus now. It's time to get started. All right. It's time to begin. Our topic today is Beyond Crises with secondary multilingual learners. We have three very prominent speakers and scholars with us today. Joining us, you know them, you love them. We have Debbie Zakarian, Margarita Espino Calderon, and Margot Gottlieb. They have written a book about this very topic. It's uplifting, but it's also serious. And we want to know, it's been a crazy couple of years. So how can we make sure that our secondary multilingual learners are really banding together with the community and schools and teachers to move beyond to move beyond what has been happening. So this is going to be a very informative session, and we're so glad you're here. Let me tell you about our speakers very quickly, and then we'll get into the content. So we have Debbie Zakarian with us. She is of Zakarian and Associates. She has 3 decades of experience in this field, and she has worked with state and national agencies, school districts, and universities, providing professional development. And also she has authored and co-authored several books around culturally and linguistically diverse students. We have Margarita Espino Calderon, who is a professor emerita and senior research scientist at Johns Hopkins University, as well as Margot Gottlieb, who is the co-founder and lead developer for WIDA at the Wisconsin Center for Education Research, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Now, there's a whole lot more to these panelists than just that, but that is just a quick introduction to who they are. We want to say thank you to them for being here today and volunteering their time to share this very valuable information. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie, who's going to kick off our presentation today. Okay, Debbie, we're waiting for camera on and unmute.
Hi, everyone.
Here you are.
So I think you can see the slideshow, right, Liz?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Zakarian, and I'm really excited that Saddleback has generously agreed to provide this webinar. And thank you, Anita, our interpreter, and those of you that are here from Gallaudet and elsewhere. We're really delighted to have you here. Anita, Liz brought this up about the pandemic, and certainly while the pandemic has really affected every classroom across the globe, it's really also amplified the tremendous struggles that many multilingual students have been experiencing for generations. And it's really shown a very bright light on many of the inequities that have been occurring for many, many years. So with that as our backdrop, the big question that we should all be asking is, how can we move beyond crises, whatever they are, by, to truly create equity in our schools, truly reimagine what's possible, to look at the research and really help us to move forward to imagining what we might do to move beyond crises, whatever these are and whenever these occur. So we're going to begin this training by asking everyone to pretend that you're this high school student. And let me show you, here's this high school student, Juan. And let's say that this past September, you experienced a devastating hurricane where you've come to this, your local school district, wherever you work, with your mom and your sister. So as you imagine yourself being Juan, who's moved to this new community with your mom and sister, what would you want your particular local community where Juan is living with his mom and his sister, what would you want your local community to do so that you feel safe, supported, and are a valued member of your local community? Please take a minute to share your ideas in the chat box. And as you do, I'll wait a few seconds and then share some additional thoughts. So if you're Juan, pretending that you are him, in the chat box, just share some thoughts. What would you want your local community to do to help you feel all of these things that are written on the slide? So as you're writing, and some of you are really writing some wonderful ideas, having empathy, holding a support group, you're writing some really wonderful ideas. Here's some things to think about as we're continuing to think about this student Juan. So here he is with his sister Beatrice and his mom, Mrs. Morales. crises can be an incredible time for reimagining or even imagining what we might do by working together, by being in it together to support students like Juan, Beatrice, and his mom, like the Brockton Public Schools in Massachusetts, who learned very quickly how important it is for all of its outreach workers, nurses, and other support staff to have smartphones so that they can continue to communicate with families using families' preferred means of communication, which is using WhatsApp. They see the power, should I say, Brockton sees the power of overcoming inequities by truly embracing being interconnected with each other. And that is what is appearing here, is what kinds of things can we do to imagine how well our family and local community, our school and district community, and our classroom communities can be interconnected and interdependent on one another to really help students not just to be successful in school, but to flourish. So let's look at this a little bit more. In our book that we're going to be showing you later on, which is called Beyond Crises, Overcoming Linguistic and Cultural Inequities in Communities, Schools, and Classrooms, we talk about how trees, yes, trees communicate. While they occupy a vast amount of our earth, and they need air and water and the sun to grow, they also exist cooperatively and have incredible ways of communicating below ground. While all of these characteristics are very important to consider, every tree also needs an additional element, a sustainable ecosystem, not just to survive, but to truly flourish. Well, the same holds true for all of our students. That is, we don't want them just to get by or survive a crisis, whatever that is, such as the pandemic or whatever the crises might be. We want them to truly be successful. And that takes a lot of us working together, just as trees in the forest do. So to do this, we have to use what the research talks about, and that's a strength-based approach. And what's helpful in thinking about a strength-based approach is to consider historically that the fields of, well, all of the helping fields, psychology, psychiatry, social work, and education always looked at what was wrong. Like the pieces of broken glass depicted here on this slide, what we would do is find out what was wrong and then treat the identified wrong or problem by finding remedies for it, like what we would do to glue the broken pieces back together. And what was found with the research is that focusing on what was wrong always led to our having a deficit-based view of multilingual students and their families. And sadly, it led to many, many years of negative outcomes. But there's very promising research, and that is when we take time to really look away from what we perceive as deficits for our students' personal assets, their personal, social, cultural, and linguistic strengths and assets, and take just as much time to honor these, acknowledge these, and support students to see these many competencies, we have a much better chance, not just for supporting them to be successful, but in developing the mosaic that's uniquely theirs. So the big question is, how do we move beyond any crises by seeing the assets and strengths of our students, our own assets and strengths, their families, our colleagues, our communities, to really support students such as Juan and his sister to be the best version of themselves and successful in school and in their lives. So let's look at this a little bit more. Along with the strength-based approach, what we also know is interactions, and lots of them, are so important. In fact, it's part of human development. For example, the first person a baby communicates with are its parents and caregivers, whether it's a two-parent, single-parent, grandparent, foster parent, and so forth. It is that wonderful, rich interactions that form that parent-child bond. And then the next folks that people communicate with or babies communicate is their family's community, whether it's the neighbors, markets they shop in, places they go for worship, and more. It's engaging in these powerful, ever-growing, ever-familiar interactions that are part of our growth and development. And then typically children come to us, their school community, and we're expected to engage in the same type of caring for and about children as their families have. And our local communities are where students or children and students, as they grow, receive such important, wonderful interactions, and lots of them. And the more we interact, or a child interacts with all of these circles of influence, the more these interactions continuously expand that student's experience in the world around them and help them to grow and develop. So with this as our background, if we look at how children engage in so many rich interactions as part of their development, what can we do to support our multilingual learners to have even more? For example, a typical family brings their child to the doctor, the dentist, helps them engage in after and out of school activities, such as the ones that are listed here. And also families are involved in attending school-based events and activities, such as the ones that are listed here. So if you think about this, what types of activities, think about this for a minute. What types of activities did your parents engage so that you could be involved in all three of these categories? So what type of activities did your parents do to help support you when you were young and engaging in these different types of activities? Just jot down an idea or two in the chat box. What did your parents do to help you engage in these activities? So as you're writing or thinking in the chat box, we all have ideas about what our parents did. Some of you are writing piano lessons, baseball, little league. My parents came to the school. You're saying many, many different things. So think about this as we think about that ecosystem that we talked about. Think about the multilingual learners that you work with. What types are they involved in the same volume of activities as the other students that you work with or that attend your schools? Are they involved in the same health and well-being after and out of school? And are their families involved in the classroom-based activities that we've listed? And if you're saying, I don't think they are, as we think about that ecosystem and that concept of having interactions and lots of them, we have to think about how we can scale or build up systems where our multilingual students engage in all of the activities or the same activities and even more that their classmates do. So let's look at an example, an important example. And if you notice, I've highlighted three things. One is eye care. And if you noticed, Beatrice was wearing eyeglasses, Juan's sister, and her family needed to take her to an eye doctor. So the school, knowing that she needed the support service, made sure that she found a local optometrist that would help her get glasses. Juan likes to play sports, and the school also got him involved in their town's sports clubs. And then there's service learning, a wonderful and important part of building systems where students can give back. So let's look at a powerful example from the Brockton Public Schools. An example of service learning where students contribute to the community is Brockton High School. They're a city that's very diverse and becoming much more diverse linguistically, and they noticed a high level of need for medical interpreters in the city. They created a medical interpretation and translation certification program where multilingual, multicultural Spanish-speaking, Haitian, and Cape Verdean students, among others, participate in a 2-year program of study about working in medical settings. During their senior year, students intern at the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center. And according to Brockton's coordinator, Rachel and Brianna, the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center has hired and continues to hire many of the graduates of the medical interpretation and translation program. Another district is Framingham High School in Massachusetts. They greatly support student service learning projects in the form of high school students supporting middle and elementary school students in various projects to support student learning and contributions to the community. So imagine the contributions that these two school districts are making with service learning experiences. So school community partnerships happen when we have a point person who works among our family, school, and local communities to really build on our collective assets on students' behalf. For example, here's a team from Brockton, and it can be a person or a team. So here's a team from Brockton High School working with families and the local community, as well as Amal Kayed, a family outreach worker working on behalf of the Dearborn schools and with families. So one of the important takeaways on really helping these interconnected ecosystems come together are these three takeaways. First, form a school team that's asset-based, based on the strengths and assets of students, families, and our own assets and strengths, and our local community's strengths and assets. Identify the needs and desires of our students, and build on our external partners or local community partners based on their assets and strengths. So that's our community segment of this presentation. Next, we're going to turn to Margarita, who will speak to the second element of our ecosystem, the school community. Margarita?
Thank you, Debbie. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session one more time. Today, I would like to focus on the school and the district community. And I'm going to rely on Debbie to please forward the slides. There are three important messages that I would like to share today. And that's good because this is perhaps the most important one. Where do we begin to build a community, a true community around multilingual learner success? And that is by bringing high schools and middle schools together to create that mindset, to get ready for the school year or the rest of the year, and to begin to think of what is it, how is it that we're going to work together. And so on the next slide, you'll see that perhaps the beginning of all this is to have a specific role for administrators, school administrators, district administrators, that they see their role as implementers of a whole school professional development program. And they attend that professional development with teachers, all the workshops, all the sessions, because they need to sustain the implementation, a quality implementation. Hence, in order to do so, they need to know what the teachers are about to implement. And the message that they send throughout the year is that our school is going to go from compliance to excellence. It's time to attain that level of excellence. And so that's what we're going to do. And on the next slide, you'll see that the administrators also have their own sessions. They come together for a couple of days, maybe during the summer, to map out the teacher support systems. Yes, we're going to have a lot of hurdles. We don't know exactly what's going to happen next year, but we want to map out those hurdles, barriers, detours, and start thinking about options so that we don't drop the ball. We're always mindful of where we need to turn and where we want to wind up. Thus, in terms of curriculum, it behooves every single teacher in the whole school, especially core content teachers in middle schools and high schools, to integrate language, literacy, social emotional learning into all the core content areas. Yes, and you can, as you saw those wheels spinning, we see that vocabulary is not just it's something in itself. It's not just for teaching it as a separate entity, but it must be integrated into whatever the students are reading in the classroom, they're writing assignments. And as you can see, that purple little container, that container is full of social emotional learning and competencies. Those are being spread throughout all the classrooms so that the wheels of curriculum and learning are constantly moving, and they're moving very efficiently. Now, why teach a lot of vocabulary? Before reading, during reading, after students read, before they write? Well, because it correlates with reading comprehension and academic writing. The more words they know, the better the comprehension, and of course, the better compositions. And that in turn correlates with more learning of the content. So the more they read, the more they write, the more vocabulary, the more content that they're able to assimilate. And that, of course, leads to academic success, success in those exams and even teacher tests. We want them to be successful. But not just in school, we want them to be successful after school, whether it's in college or in life. And studies on vocabulary also tell us that comprehension depends on knowing between 90 to 95% of the words in a text, in a chapter, in a paragraph, and on a test question. Usually the content-specific words are nested in long sentences, and those words sometimes are not really understood because of the other little words around that concept. And we need to make sure that they're learning different levels of vocabulary, not just the content words in the content classrooms, but all the other words that are nesting those very specific, subject-specific words. And of course, we need to teach those. We also need to teach the language of SEL. We need to make sure that the students themselves are learning that language. Do they know vocabulary? Do they know how to express their own self-management issues, their own self-awareness needs? Do they know how to communicate with peers, with others? Do they have that social awareness and communication skills in order to develop good relationship skills? Of course, all of that is going to lead to responsible decision-making. And so the language begins when all the teachers come together to practice some of these strategies. Here we see a group of middle school teachers going through the same activities that they will be teaching their multilingual learners or the whole classroom. And we want teachers to go through these activities. They need to experience, they need to feel what is going to work, what has never worked, and it's time to move it aside and do something different, but they need to experience it. So this entails a lot of time given to teachers, quality professional development, but time during the school day to put all of these lessons together. And of course, there is that commitment. Thank you, Debbie. And on the next slide, there is that commitment to rigor, support, and advocacy. And here we have one example from a high school teacher. She works with newcomers, especially SIFE, students with interrupted formal education. And she doesn't give up. She makes her lessons very rigorous. Here she's teaching about ratiocination, how to edit their work. And she makes sure that the students are ready to graduate in 4 years because she participates in several committees to make sure that there's creative scheduling throughout the day, that other teachers are also involved in this, that there are multiple interventions, and that every teacher in the school is a cheerleader for the multilingual learners, that they're always cognizant of some of the needs that the students bring. And on the next slide, we see that even the co-teaching organizational structures are changing. There's a different way of organizing co-teaching. It has to be more of a balanced approach. And that also entails time for teachers to get together and to put those wonderful, well-organized co-teaching instances. So as we can see, there's a lot of time and effort that needs to be placed. In the chat box, what else have you found that needs more time? What do administrators, school board members, counselors, everyone, what do they need to know? What do they need to do in order to build those support systems for teachers? Jot some things in the chat box. What are some things that you have experienced? And on the next slide, we see the good news. As you're writing, let me share what the good news is. That now there is a lot of money. There's a lot of money. So you have to go and find it. You have to make sure that everything that relates to the ESSA guidelines, U.S. Department of Education, Elementary Secondary School Act, is calling for. What ESSA calls for is every school ought to set high expectations for all students. Every school provides resources needing for meeting those expectations, and every school ensures action when something is not going right. When a group of students falls off the track, and that's usually the multilingual learners, and so it needs to be developing these different types of approaches, as we saw on the second slide, where the administrators come together and map out the year. They also need to map out the resources, the funding sources, the things that need to be paid for, which perhaps have never been paid for before. And all of that, of course, is going to lead to our collective goals. The collective goal of the school is, first of all, to learn more about the students. What do newcomers need? What do newcomers who are SIFE need that is different from other newcomers? What about long-term males? We can't put all of them in the same ESL classrooms. there are very specific interventions. There are very specific things that we can do, but the whole school needs to learn about this, not just the ESL teacher, not just the assessors, it's the whole school that has to be very much aware of the type of students that they have in their class. The other thing to remember that successful schools have always kept in mind is that there needs to be more student-student interaction. Student-teacher interaction, yes, but student-student interaction is where they practice those social emotional competencies, where they practice the language, where they develop reading comprehension. All of that needs to be part of the plan, of the goal. And then finally, every teacher, especially core content teacher, needs to learn new strategies that are evidence-based, that are research-based, yes, but that have been tested empirically, and that there's data to show that, yes, these work, these will work, and help multilingual learners be successful, not just in school, but beyond school as well. But let's take a look at the classroom level, and Margot is going to share some insights on that.
Welcome to the final third of our webinar today. I'm Margot. And what we're going to do in the next 15 minutes or so is just revisit this ecosystem that Debbie has so shared with us, and how it really represents a confluence of communities, schools, and classrooms. Let's think about it. It's been almost 2 years now since we've opened our collective eyes to the merging of these three interdependent communities and the value of this codependence that has formed as an entree for helping everyone tackle linguistic and cultural inequities. What we have seen using our assets-based model, of course, is that there's been a positive outcome of some of these crises for our multilingual learners, because we recognize that their home is a stimulus for learning. In other words, ongoing crises, and there have been many over the last couple of years, have forced us to look inward and look at those persons who have been most impacted. So in essence, in being able to glean these strengths from our multilingual learners, their communities, their schools, we also have seen a humanization of education. Let's see what's happened to Beatriz. She's her 8th grader. And she had to spend a lot of time at home, just like everybody else. She decided to take the initiative to learn outside of school. She went and she explored a community. So in the examples here for Beatriz is engaging in biliteracy development by logging examples of the languages she hears and sees, perhaps in stores' windows or on billboards. Also, she's being able to utilize the skills she knows in science by inventorying plants and trees, and maybe even the birds in them, something that everyone should be able to see. And thirdly, that she's looking at the different types of buildings. She's intrigued by the shape. She's intrigued by everything she sees. And this has become part of her world, so much more so than it ever was before. And she's going to bring those talents to school and her classroom. And it is incumbent upon her teachers to advantage those assets that she's bringing. And here is somebody who's going to do that. It's Mr. Abreu. He's her science teacher. And so rather than looking at the textbook as a curriculum. He is working with multilingual learners to bring their world into his classroom. Just like you, Mr. Abreu knows how to leverage these assets that Beatriz is bringing, whether they're in person, whether they're in a hybrid situation, even remotely. It's been a challenge. We all admit that. Mr. Abreu, as many of you have had to learn a lot about technology and how the technology can promote that student-student peer-to-peer interaction. How to use tools, how to use break rooms, Padlets, for example, as a way of stimulating discussion amongst his middle school and high school students. And he makes sure that each student can show each other anatomy, for example, of different plants, or describe in detail the language of science that they saw throughout their neighborhood. What else can individual classroom teachers do? Well, they're going to have to honor, because that's part of this whole new paradigm. If you go to the next slide, each and every one of its classrooms and all its heroes, because every single one of our multilingual learners, in fact, every student can be considered a superhero, as is each one of us. We should all be tapping ourselves on the back. Every student has super qualities, as does their teacher. And what we want to advantage are each student's linguistic, cultural, experiential assets, and make that a springboard for further learning. And not only that, Mr. Abreu draws from family members' expertise, so to speak. What we say is their funds of knowledge, in particular in biology, perhaps even in agriculture. And he's able to couple these resources in the community and in homes in order to make each and every student feel safe and cared for. This is a requisite to building learning for these children. Let's go to the next slide. Because this is an acknowledgement to each and every one of you, because it's very difficult to untangle this web of inequities. There's so many demands that are being placed on educators each and every day. So one easy strategy to remember, and I'm sure many of you do this already, always use affirmative language, not only with your students, but with your colleagues. Be accepting and curious of the languages of the students, whether you're familiar with them or not. Encourage communication of your students in their partner language as a means of feeling wanted and secure. And let me just iterate real fast what Margarita said, and that is, we need to infuse social and emotional development into our learning, collectively as teachers, but also how it works in tandem with our students' language and conceptual development. So we have, over the last couple of minutes, thinking about all the positive attributes our multilingual learners are bringing to school from their homes and their communities. Your chat here is what might be missed if Mr. Abreu or any one of the teachers in your school or setting can't capture them or only uses the textbook. How are our multilingual learners going to be impacted if we don't advantage where they come from and the experiences they have undergone? Just think about it and put a couple of reasons in the chat. relationship building is key. I see this notion of testing coming up. Testing is rather alien to many of these students from the last couple of years. So that's an important leap that has to be made within the classroom. How to ensure that curriculum and instruction is going to match that summative way of capturing what students can do. If we use asset-based language, to me personally, there's not an achievement gap. There's an opportunity gap because teachers haven't really been able to draw from the students learning from the community, students learning from their siblings, students learning from family members. We have to think about where they are and where these students can go next. So in this slide, what is so critical for multilingual learners and unique to them are their identity formation. That is, when these students, when all students have opportunities to reflect on their own thought processes, they're building metacultural awareness. And metacultural awareness is foundational for gaining self-confidence. This is where students are being able to connect their background knowledge. That's what they gained over the last couple of years in the environment in which they've been, to new information in school. But beyond that, our multilingual learners have been able to think about, or it almost flows naturally, metalinguistic sensitivity. They're able to see the linkages between the languages that they know and how language can be used for different purposes and different audiences, depending on the topic or its purpose, or how they are expected to produce evidence of learning. Finally, metacultural awareness is also critical because it enables our multilingual learners to gain multiple perspectives. Not everybody's in dual language education, because by the time students reach middle and high school, that seems to be more of a class than a grade level commitment. But everyone can engage in looking at how we are enriched by multiple languages and cultures. And all that together helps shape our identities and our students' identities. One of, I would think, goals, that's what we've been sharing with you today, is to promote student agency within the classroom. And that's through a positive self-image that they are going to gain by being able to tap what they know and draw from their experiential base. So here are just 9 of many ways in which students, as agents of their own learning, can provoke change. What are some of the things that you have done? Just choose 1, maybe 2 of the 9 suggestions here of what students can do to really show that they're agents of their own learning. Help them. Good. I see the A. I see 9. Okay. Showing empathy again as part of that social and emotional learning package. Number 6, reflecting on learning. You should be doing that every single day. And when you reflect on learning and you have multilingual learners think about how they learned, what they learned, they can do that in 1 or more languages. It doesn't have to be only in English. Through a log or a journal or some other personal way of interacting. Three strategies we're going to share with you. that will help promote student agency. Here are the three, and then I'm going to give you an example of each. So the first one is, how can you maximize your learning opportunities for your students so in fact they can interact with their peers seamlessly? The second one, how can they co-design, co-construct, co-craft learning targets? Sometimes you might call them learning objectives. You as a teacher alongside your students. What are multiple ways in which students can show their evidence of learning? And third, something I said more than once already is, you as a teacher, how can you embed your students' personal experiences, their lived experiences, along with their languages and cultures, their opinions, into your content area classroom? Let's go a little bit more in depth and flesh out these three ideas. The first one, Mr. Abreu might help his students tune into their passions by generating topics to explore based on their interests, illuminating their strengths, letting each of his multilingual learners take ownership in their learning, contribute to classroom decision-making. Mr. Abreu also promotes peer interaction. In a science class, it's easy because hopefully they're engaging in inquiry-based learning, which is better in small groups or in partnerships. And in that way, students are building relationships. And in those relationships, they're going to gain trust. The second idea, we have Juan here. Juan and his classmates, along with Mr. Abreu, as the facilitator, they think about how language and content are integrated, how they come together in individual lessons, and how those lessons catapult into a unit of learning. And in doing so, by having the students, the multilingual learners among them, really help in the design of curriculum, so to speak, they become vested in their learning. So together, Mr. Abreu and Juan and the other students brainstorm and generate options for showing evidence of learning. And each student, by having those choices and voice, they're able to illuminate their own strengths. And here's some examples of multimodal evidence that is in high school, even in middle school. I realize, as must you, that most of demonstration of evidence of learning is text-based. It doesn't have to be. What is your intent? What are your targets? How can they be reached? Does it always have to be through text, through literacy-based experiences? No. Here's many of the ways that multilingual learners in middle and high school can show content that may not have the language in English yet. If they're biliterate, let them use multiple languages. But if they're not, here's some examples of ways in which they can demonstrate their learning visually, auditorily, through reading and writing, which is the more traditional way, or kinesthetically, through gestures. What I want you to do is think about just one multimodal piece of evidence you might pursue next week. Because before vacations, students don't want to concentrate on text-based lessons. Pick one of these, see what the kids can do based on the content that they're learning. So in the next slide, How can you make those connections? Well, this is really the thesis of our whole book. By overcoming linguistic and cultural inequities through interconnections, through interdependence, by tapping our students' interaction through families, schools, and classrooms, we're able to advance their learning, accelerate their learning. Because in today's world, when we're working with our multilingual learners and their families, that means axiomatically we are going to embrace multiple languages and cultures, because that's what community is all about. What we as teachers, as educators, as administrators, we must do is to be more inclusive of showcasing the linguistic and cultural assets of our multilingual learners. And then together, as a classroom community, as a school community, as a district community, as a family and local community, we can begin to transform educational practices. I hope you've had, I was going to say a good time, but it's hard to see you, so I don't know what you've been doing. We welcome any information that you want to share with us. You can contact us at our emails or on our Twitter account. Much of this that we've talked about is encapsulated within our book, Beyond Crises. We're so happy you were able to join us today. And Liz, I think it's time for a raffle. What do you think?
It is time for a raffle. What we've done in the few minutes leading up to the conclusion of your section, Margot, is we went through the live attendees and we randomly picked 2 winners. So the winners are Zamira Carroll, congratulations, and Amanda Levos. We will email you and ask for shipping information. So be on the lookout for contact from Saddleback so we can get you your book.
And Liz, I see there's a couple of questions that have been generated and put in the Q&A. Looks like we have about 5 more minutes. Maybe we can just spend some time informally talking to each other.
Yes, before we take questions, we always make sure that everybody knows who is coming up on our next webinar, which will be in January. So join us for Dr. McKnight and Dr. Cash. Teens love to argue. How do we teach evidence-based writing in the disciplines and content areas? You can register for that on our website or be on the lookout for an email. And don't forget, our new Go ELL Literacy Library is now available. These are our content-focused genres, so please contact me if you have any questions about that. Okay, let me do a stop share here so everybody can be seen. Now, in the next couple of minutes, let's tackle those questions. So yes, the first question was for specific examples for creative scheduling for newcomers or SLIFE or students in regards to classes and interventions. So I know Debbie wanted to take this one. What do you say, Debbie?
I think Margarita probably has much to say. So I'm going to turn it over to her. If you want, Margarita, I've got Lisa Tartaglia's quote from our book, if you prefer that. But otherwise, please share what you wish. You did that section.
Thank you. Yes, and please share Lisa's quote, and then I'll elaborate on that.
Well, what I love is the question. The question was, how did you get those students that had interrupted schooling to graduate? And that is so exceptional to have high school students who've had interrupted schooling graduate from school. And I found her answer so amazingly inclusive of our ideas. And what she wrote was creative scheduling, interventions, mediations, and being a cheerleader, which you shared, Margarita. But what she says is that in her school, we have block scheduling at our high school, the principal, assistant principals, Counselors, EL teachers, and I reconfigured the schedules so that newcomers would have English and math and English and reading every day instead of once or twice a week on alternate days. So that was one intervention they did. And she wrote that they need this continuity and that they've also added tutorial programs online that integrate such things as phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, reading, and writing, and that they designed summer school programs for them. So that's one of the many things that she wrote. She also wrote that we all became mediators for all that is high school life.
Mhm.
And what she wrote is, we noticed none were taking music, theater, and other extracurricular activities and clubs. A couple of boys dabbled with guitar, but they weren't in the guitar class. None were on the student council. So Lisa says, I had a meeting with the specialist teachers and explained how to reach out and invite this group of students. Otherwise, they wouldn't have signed up on their own.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then academically, she developed a plan where each content teacher mentored a small group. Counselors and athletic coaches helped to promote equity. She worked with the EL teachers to help them fill out graduation papers, college enrollment, senior picture registration, and all those things that are such an important part of schooling, but not for newcomers.
Mhm.
And then lastly, she wrote that her biggest challenge was being mindful of the social emotional ups and downs. They wanted to finish high school, but had so many barriers that they often gave up or were on the verge of dropping out. Lisa writes, I became a cheerleader for them. I literally called a senior girl every morning. I said, get up, hurry up, don't miss the bus. Probably the coach called senior boys now and then, since most of them live far from the school. They had to take the bus. If they missed it, they had to walk or else they'd be late. Whenever they arrived, we would gently say, we're so glad to see you.
Mhm.
The
Thank you.
newcomers, yeah, that
Okay.
I could go on.
Yeah. She was such a powerful teacher. I say was because she's now an assistant principal. And so she is running another high school pretty much the way she was running her classroom and her program for the newcomers and the SIVE students. And so it's exciting that more and more core content teachers are getting involved and taking ownership of the multilingual learners' holistic life. And that's what it takes. It's not just a counselor, but your math, biology, chemistry teachers, all of them need to be involved, and all of them need to be talking to each other. That's why a whole school approach is the best approach for all students. But thank you, Debbie. I'm glad you read that whole thing.
Okay, and we had one final question as we wrap up. This one comes from Robert. Should the students treat their teachers in the same manner that a college student would with their professors? I thought this was an interesting question in terms of relationship. So is there a parallel there or not, based on what you're suggesting in your book in that relationship building? He says rate their teachers. Should they rate their teachers like professors are rated? Just to be clear. That was not clear initially. I'm sorry. Should the students be able to rate their teachers? And would that help with the relationship piece or not?
I'm not familiar with if rating teachers has helped relationship building. I don't know if studies have been done on that. Maybe the question, if we could broaden it, would be, should students be giving feedback as much as teachers give feedback?
Mm-hmm.
And that I think we do have both research and ideas about how important it is for students to express their thoughts, feelings, and ideas. And so we would want them to build a strong relationship with their teacher to really feel both courageous enough and have enough of a voice to express those.
What I think is important, that a number is meaningless and doesn't convey anything to a teacher. What is more important, again, would be the co-creation of a set of criteria that everyone agrees upon that would serve as a way of providing feedback, as Debbie would say. And then it could be much more positive in its orientation, and with the feedback are action steps that the class can take on together.
Yeah, conversation is the best source for developing positive relationships. Lots of good talking. Yeah, I agree with Margot. No numbers, please.
Well, thank you. We are just about out of time. So we want to thank all of you for joining us today. And thank you to our panelists. And thank you to Anita for your time today. We look forward to seeing you back on our webinar series in January. Everybody have a wonderful, restful winter break. And we'll see everybody again soon. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
now.
Thank you.